The morning sun peeked through the worn curtains of Sarah Chen's small apartment as her alarm buzzed at 6 o'clock a.m. She stretched and smiled, looking around her cozy but modest one-bedroom home. The apartment wasn't much, especially by San Francisco standards, but it was exactly what she wanted, a space that was truly her own. Sarah's routine was simple but purposeful. She made her bed neatly, just as she had done every morning since she was a child. Her grandmother had taught her that starting the day with a made bed meant starting with an accomplished task. The thought of her grandmother made her touch the vintage ring on her left hand, right next to her simple wedding band. As she prepared her breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, her phone buzzed with a message from her husband, Michael Jean. "Have a great day teaching, love. Dinner tonight?" Sarah smiled at his message, typing back a quick yes, before returning to her morning routine. The contrast between her life and Michael's always amused her. While she drove her trusty 2010 Honda Civic to Lincoln Elementary School where she taught kindergarten, her husband was running one of the fastest-growing tech companies in Silicon Valley. Their arrangement was unusual, but it worked perfectly for them. 3 years ago, when they got married, they had made an unusual agreement. Sarah had insisted on maintaining her independent lifestyle, wanting to continue teaching and living simply. Michael, despite being worth billions, had understood and supported her decision. They kept their marriage quiet, not out of shame, but to preserve the normalcy they both cherished. At school, Sarah parked in her usual spot, grabbing her worn teacher's bag filled with supplies she'd bought with her own salary. Her colleagues knew she was married, but none knew to whom. She preferred it that way. It meant the hugs she received from her students and the respect she earned from parents came from her own merit, not her husband's wealth. The kindergarten classroom was already buzzing with energy when she walked in. 20 small faces lit up at her arrival. "Good morning, Miss Chen," they called out in unison, using her professional name. Little Emma ran up to her with a slightly crushed daisy, probably picked from the school garden. "This is for you, Miss Chen." Sarah accepted it with genuine delight, placing it in the small vase on her desk next to the children's previous gifts, a collection of rocks, feathers, and wildflowers. As she began the morning circle time, Sarah caught her reflection in the classroom window. She was wearing simple jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a casual blouse, nothing that would suggest she was married to one of the city's wealthiest men. Her long black hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and the only jewelry she wore was her grandmother's ring and her wedding band. Throughout the morning, Sarah helped tie shoelaces, mediated sharing disputes, taught basic counting, and led sing-alongs. During art time, she sat with her students, helping them with their finger painting projects, her hands becoming as colorfully stained as theirs. This was why she had insisted on keeping her job. These genuine moments of impact and connection were worth more to her than any luxury her husband's wealth could provide. During lunch break, while her students ate their sandwiches and fruit cups, Sarah sat at her small desk eating the lunch she had packed. A simple sandwich and an apple. She checked her phone to find another message from Michael about their dinner plans. He wanted to take her to a new restaurant, but Sarah suggested their usual spot instead. A small Chinese restaurant in their neighborhood where they could be just another couple enjoying dinner together. As the afternoon session began, Sarah reflected on how different her life was from what people might expect of a billionaire's wife. There were no designer clothes, no luxury cars, no fancy lunches or spa days. Instead, there were alphabet songs, multiplication tables, and the joyful tales of 25-year-olds learning about the world. Her grandmother had always told her that true wealth wasn't about money in the bank or the car you drove. It was about being content with who you were and making a difference in others' lives. As she helped little Tommy sound out his first word and watched his face light up with pride, Sarah knew she was exactly where she wanted to be, living exactly the life she had chosen. The simple gold band on her finger caught the afternoon light as she wrote tomorrow's lesson plan. It was a constant reminder that while she had access to unimaginable wealth, she had something far more valuable, the freedom to be herself and the opportunity to make a difference in children's lives, one lesson at a time. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across San Francisco's Union Square as Sarah Chen left school early on her third wedding anniversary. She had asked for a half-day off, something she rarely did, to visit Morton's fine jewelry. Her grandmother's vintage ring needed cleaning, and she wanted it to look perfect for her anniversary dinner with Michael that evening. The ring had been her grandmother's most precious possession, a delicate gold band with a small diamond that had seen 7 decades of love and life. When her grandmother passed away 5 years ago, it was the only thing Sarah had wanted to inherit. Now, it sat snugly on her finger next to her wedding band, a constant reminder of the woman who had raised her after her parents' accident. Sarah parked her Honda in a nearby garage, wincing slightly at the $30 parking fee. She could easily afford it now, but old habits died hard. She was still wearing her work clothes. Comfortable black pants, a blue blouse with tiny paint stains from her student's art project, and practical flats. Her long black hair was coming loose from its ponytail after a busy day with 20 energetic kindergartners. As she walked toward Morton's, she passed several high-end boutiques. Through the windows, she could see women in designer clothes examining expensive handbags and shoes. Sarah adjusted her worn teacher's bag on her shoulder and smiled to herself, thinking about how Michael always teased her for refusing to buy a new one. The display windows at Morton's sparkled with diamonds and precious gems. Sarah paused for a moment, her eyes drawn to a simple sapphire pendant. Her mother's birthday was coming up next month, and the blue stone reminded her of her mother's favorite color. Maybe she could ask about its price while she was there. The heavy glass door swung open smoothly, and cool air-conditioned air wrapped around her. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light reflecting off the glass display cases that lined the walls. The store was mostly empty except for a couple examining engagement rings and a well-dressed woman discussing diamond grades with a sales associate. Sarah stood near the entrance for a moment, taking in the luxurious atmosphere. It was quite different from the small family jewelry store where her grandmother had originally bought her ring. A young sales associate approached but quickly turned away when another customer, a woman in an expensive-looking suit, walked in. Finally, an older woman with perfectly styled gray hair and a name tag reading Patricia, store manager, approached her. Sarah noticed how Patricia's eyes moved from her face to her casual clothes, lingering on the paint stains on her sleeve. "Can I help you?" Patricia asked, her tone suggesting she doubted Sarah could afford anything in the store. Sarah smiled warmly, used to not being judged by appearances after years of teaching. "Yes, please. I'd like to have my grandmother's ring cleaned." She held up her hand, showing the vintage ring. "It's very special to me, and today's my wedding anniversary." Patricia's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose as she examined the ring from a distance. "I see. And where did you say this ring came from?" "It was my grandmother's. She bought it in 1953 from a jeweler in Chinatown." Sarah's voice held a touch of pride. The ring might not be the most expensive piece in the store, but its sentimental value was priceless. Patricia replied, her tone skeptical. "We only clean jewelry with verified authenticity. We wouldn't want to be responsible for any damage to costume pieces." Sarah's cheeks warmed. "It's not costume jewelry. My grandmother saved for months to buy it. It's real gold and diamond, just not very large." Patricia's lips formed a tight smile. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the jewelry care shops in the mall. They're better equipped to handle vintage pieces like yours." Before Sarah could respond, she noticed the sapphire pendant she'd seen in the window being shown to the well-dressed woman who had entered after her. Sarah gathered her courage and asked, "Actually, while I'm here, could you tell me about that sapphire pendant in the window? My mother's birthday is coming up." Patricia's laugh was sharp and quick. "That piece is $12,000. Perhaps I could direct you to our costume jewelry section. Or as I mentioned, the mall might have more suitable options in your price range." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She had grown used to people underestimating her, but something about Patricia's tone made her feel like that insecure little girl who had lost her parents all over again. Her grandmother had always taught her to hold her head high, but right now, all she wanted to do was disappear. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone to call Michael. She had never used his name or status to get better treatment, but at this moment, she needed his support more than she needed her pride. Patricia wasn't finished with her humiliation of Sarah. As Sarah stood there with her phone in her trembling hand, the store manager turned to address the other customers in the store with a loud, theatrical voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse the disruption. We pride ourselves on providing an exclusive shopping experience at Morton's." She gestured toward Sarah with a dismissive wave. "Sometimes people wander in without understanding the caliber of our establishment." Several customers turned to stare. The well-dressed woman examining the sapphire pendant smirked, while her companion whispered something behind her hand. Sarah felt her face burning with embarrassment, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Stand tall, even when others try to make you feel small. Taking a deep breath, Sarah straightened her spine. I understand this is an exclusive store, she said quietly but firmly. But my grandmother's ring is genuine, and I'm a paying customer just like everyone else. Patricia's laugh was sharp and cold. A paying customer. My dear, the cleaning cloth we use on our jewelry probably costs more than your entire outfit. She picked up Sarah's hand without permission, examining the vintage ring with exaggerated scrutiny. And this? Well, I've seen better quality at street fairs. Sarah pulled her hand back, cradling it protectively against her chest. The ring might be small, but it had been her grandmother's pride and joy. She remembered the stories of how her grandmother had worked extra shifts at the restaurant for months to save up for it. You have no right to judge its value, Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. Some things are worth more than their price tag. A young sales associate who had been watching the scene uncomfortably stepped forward. Miss Patricia, maybe I could help with the cleaning. Ashley, please attend to our real customers. Patricia cut her off sharply. She turned back to Sarah with a cold smile. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lovely costume jewelry store at the mall 3 blocks away. They'd be much better suited to handle your heirloom. The way she said heirloom made it sound like a joke. More customers had gathered, some pretending to examine nearby displays while watching the scene unfold. Sarah could hear their whispers, see their judgmental glances at her paint-stained clothes and worn teacher's bag. I'd like to speak to the owner, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. She hadn't wanted to use Michael's name or influence, but this treatment was becoming unbearable. Patricia's laugh was joined by several others in the store. The owner? Darling, Morton's is owned by the Zhang Corporation. Mr. Zhang is one of the wealthiest men in San Francisco. He doesn't deal with. She paused, looking Sarah up and down. Situations like this. Sarah's phone suddenly felt very heavy in her hand. If they only knew she had Michael Zhang's private number right there, that she was about to call him. But something stopped her from revealing it. Would anyone even believe her? Looking at her reflection in the jewelry case, she saw what they saw, a simply dressed Asian woman in worn clothes with paint stains, carrying a shabby bag. Perhaps, Patricia continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy, you could try the pawn shop down the street. They're less particular about authenticity, and they might even offer you a few dollars for your vintage piece. That was the final straw. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her fingers shook as she finally pressed Michael's number on her phone. She had never used his status for special treatment before, and never wanted to be treated differently because of who she married. But in this moment, being strong on her own felt impossible. As the phone rang, she looked around the store one last time. The judging faces, the whispers behind manicured hands, the looks of pity and disdain, it all swirled around her like a bad dream. She caught sight of her reflection again in one of the glass cases, but this time she saw more than just her simple clothes. She saw her grandmother's strength, her own dignity, and the truth these people couldn't see. That worth wasn't measured in designer labels or diamond carats. Hello. Michael's voice came through the phone, warm and concerned. Sarah, is everything okay? Sarah took a deep breath, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. Michael, could you come to Morton's Jewelry? I need you. The security guard was just reaching for Sarah's arm when the front door chimed again. This time, a man in worn jeans and a plain gray hoodie walked in, his hands tucked into his pockets. Behind him came a sharp-dressed woman in a business suit, carrying a leather briefcase and typing rapidly on her phone. No one paid much attention to them at first. The store's focus was still on Sarah, who was trying to gather her dignity while wiping away tears. Patricia was speaking to the security guard, pointing at Sarah's shabby teacher's bag as if it might contain stolen goods. Sir, the security guard said to the man in the hoodie, who had started walking toward them. Please stand back. We're handling a situation here. The man in the hoodie ignored him, walking straight to Sarah. Without saying a word, he pulled her into a gentle hug. Sarah buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. The the same brand he'd worn since college, despite now being able to afford any luxury fragrance in the world. "Michael," she whispered, her voice muffled against his hoodie. Patricia's perfectly styled hair seemed to bristle with annoyance. "Sir, please step away from her. We don't need any more disruptions in our store." The woman with the briefcase cleared her throat loudly. "Ms. Patricia Morrison? I'm Jessica Chen, executive assistant to Michael John." She pulled out a business card and handed it to Patricia, whose face showed the first flicker of uncertainty. "Mr. Zhang is here to finalize the acquisition details." The store fell silent. Even the customers who had been whispering stopped mid-sentence. Patricia's face went from confident to confused to pale in rapid succession. "Acquisition?" she stammered, looking between Michael in his casual clothes and Jessica in her professional attire. Michael kept one arm around Sarah while reaching for Jessica's briefcase with his free hand. He pulled out a thick folder of documents, his other arm still protectively around his wife. "Yes, acquisition," Michael said, his voice calm but cold. "The Zhang Corporation has been planning to buy Morton's jewelry chain as part of our retail division expansion. Today was supposed to be the final walkthrough before signing the papers." He looked around the store, his eyes taking in every face that had been smirking at his wife minutes ago. "But I'm seeing some concerning issues with customer service." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The security guard had backed away, suddenly very interested in examining the floor tiles. The customers who had been so eager to watch Sarah's humiliation were now trying to blend into the background. "Mr. Zhang," Patricia finally managed to say, "we had no idea. I mean, if we had known." "If you had known what?" Michael's voice was sharp. "That she was my wife? That she had access to more money than most of your regular customers?" He pulled Sarah closer. "Would that have made her more worthy of basic human respect?" The well-dressed woman who had been looking at the sapphire pendant earlier tried to quietly slide toward the exit. Michael noticed. "Please, don't leave," he said loudly. "You were all so interested in watching my wife's humiliation. Stay and watch what happens next." Jessica stepped forward, opening another folder. "Mr. John, these are the final purchase agreements. Would you like to proceed with the acquisition as planned?" Sarah lifted her head from Michael's shoulder, her eyes still red from crying, but now showing a hint of steel. She looked at Patricia, who was practically shaking in her expensive shoes. She looked at Ashley, the young sales associate who had shown her kindness. She looked at all the customers who had judged her based on her clothes and appearance. Then she looked at her grandmother's ring, the simple, beautiful ring that had started this whole situation. She remembered her grandmother's words about how true character shows in how you treat others, especially when you think they can't do anything for you. Michael was watching her face carefully. "What do you think, love? Should we buy the store?" The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her answer. Sarah straightened her shoulders, channeling every ounce of her grandmother's dignity and wisdom. She had spent 3 years choosing to live simply, and now she had the chance to show everyone exactly why she was worthy of respect. Not because of her husband's money, but because of who she was as a person. Sarah looked around the now silent store, her tears drying on her cheeks. The same people who had been whispering and laughing at her expense now couldn't meet her eyes. Patricia stood frozen, her perfectly manicured hands clutching the business documents Jessica had handed her. "Actually," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "I think I would like to share something with everyone." She stepped away from Michael's protective embrace, standing tall despite her paint-stained clothes and worn shoes. 3 years ago, when I married Michael, we made a choice together. I chose to continue living simply, teaching kindergarten and driving my old Honda. She touched her grandmother's ring gently. "Not because I had to, but because I wanted to." Michael smiled proudly at his wife, while Jessica pulled out another folder from her briefcase. "Mrs. John," Jessica said, emphasizing the name while looking directly at Patricia, "would you like me to share the plans for the charitable foundation?" Several customers gasped. The woman who had clutched her designer purse away from Sarah earlier suddenly looked like she might faint. "Yes, please," Sarah said. She turned to address the store's staff and customers. "You see, Michael and I had been planning to turn Morton's into something more than just another luxury jewelry store. We wanted to create a foundation that would help underprivileged students pursue careers in business and design." Jessica began distributing brochures showing the Plan Zhang Foundation for Education and Enterprise. Mrs. Zhang will be serving as the CEO of the foundation, she explained, her voice carrying across the silent store. Patricia's face had lost all its color. CEO, but you're a kindergarten teacher. Yes, I am, Sarah said firmly, and I'm proud of it. I spent the last 3 years choosing to live on my teacher's salary, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand the real world. Not this, she gestured around at the luxury displays, the world where most people live. Michael stepped forward. My wife has more real-world business experience than most executives I know. She manages a classroom of 20 kids on a tight budget, deals with parents from all walks of life, and makes decisions that actually matter in people's lives. Ashley, the kind sales associate, stepped forward nervously. Mrs. John, the way we treated you. I'm so sorry. Sarah smiled at the young woman. Thank you, Ashley. Your kindness didn't go unnoticed. She turned to Patricia, whose hands were still shaking. You know what's interesting? This ring you mocked. She held up her grandmother's ring. It's worth more than any piece in this store. But it's so simple, Patricia stammered. My grandmother worked as a dishwasher when she first came to America, Sarah explained, her voice clear and strong. She saved for months to buy this ring. She taught me that true value isn't about price tags or brand names. It's about character, kindness, and how you treat others. The well-dressed couple who had tried to leave earlier were now standing awkwardly by the door. The woman's designer purse, which she had pulled away from Sarah earlier, suddenly looked gaudy and meaningless. Jessica stepped forward again. Mr. and Mrs. Zhang, the foundation papers are ready for your signatures. Once signed, you'll be the owners of Morton's jewelry chain, and the foundation can begin its work. Michael looked at his wife with pure admiration. What do you think, love? Ready to show them how a kindergarten teacher runs a business? Sarah stood in the middle of the store, feeling the weight of every judgment, every sneer, every moment of humiliation she had endured. But instead of anger, she felt purpose. Her grandmother had always said that the best revenge was success with grace. Yes, she said clearly, but with one condition. She turned to face Patricia and the other staff members. Everyone keeps their jobs. A collective gasp went through the store. Patricia's eyes widened in disbelief. But under new management policies, Sarah continued, starting with mandatory training on treating all customers with respect, regardless of how they look or dress. She smiled, touching her paint-stained sleeve. After all, you never know when a kindergarten teacher might turn out to be your boss. The story of what happened at Morton's Jewelry spread across San Francisco like wildfire. By the next morning, social media was buzzing with different versions of how a humble kindergarten teacher turned out to be the new owner of the city's most exclusive jewelry chain. But what happened next surprised everyone even more. Sarah arrived at the store early the next day, still dressed in her usual teaching clothes. She had stopped by before heading to her kindergarten class. Patricia was already there, standing nervously by the door, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from a sleepless night. Mrs. Zhang, Patricia began, her voice trembling. I prepared my resignation letter. Sarah held up her hand. Put it away, Patricia. That's not why I'm here. She looked around the store, now quiet and empty before opening hours. I want to tell you about my first day teaching kindergarten. Patricia blinked in confusion but listened as Sarah continued. I walked in wearing an expensive suit, carrying a designer bag, trying to look professional, Sarah said, smiling at the memory. By lunchtime, I had paint in my hair, glue on my shoes, and a very important lesson learned. Appearances mean nothing when it comes to doing what matters. The store's other employees began arriving, gathering around to listen. Sarah noticed Ashley, the kind sales associate, standing in the back, trying to make herself invisible. Ashley, please come forward, Sarah called. The young woman stepped forward nervously. Would you like to head our new customer service training program? Ashley's eyes widened. Me? But I'm just a junior associate. Who showed kindness when it wasn't popular? Sarah finished for her. That's exactly who should teach others about customer service. Sarah pulled out a notebook, her teacher's planning book, and opened it to reveal detailed notes. The Zhang Foundation for Education and Enterprise isn't just about giving money to students. It's about teaching valuable lessons about respect, dignity, and true worth. She turned to Patricia, who was still clutching her resignation letter. Patricia, you're one of the best jewelry experts in the city. I don't want to lose that expertise, but I want you to use it differently. Patricia looked up, confusion clear on her face. Starting next week, you'll be teaching a free jewelry appraisal course at the local community college, Sarah explained. Help others learn what you know. Show them that knowledge shouldn't be used to judge, but to lift others up. The story started spreading in a different way then. Local news channels wanted to cover the unusual approach of the new owner. They expected a revenge story. Rich husband buys store to punish rude staff. Instead, they found Sarah in her classroom, teaching numbers to 5-year-olds in the morning and running a $1 million business in the afternoon. A month later, Morton's hosted its first community event. The store that once intimidated people with its luxury now welcomes students from local schools to learn about gemology, business ethics, and customer service. Patricia, to everyone's surprise, turned out to be an excellent teacher. The well-dressed woman who had clutched her purse away from Sarah came back to the store. She waited until Sarah was there, then approached her with tears in her eyes. I've been ashamed of my behavior that day, she admitted. I want to volunteer for your foundation's mentoring program. My mother, she was a housekeeper who taught me to always dress rich so people would respect me. I forgot what real respect means along the way. Sarah's story went viral for a different reason now. Not because of the dramatic revelation of her identity, but because of what she did with her power. She continued teaching her kindergarten class, showing up with paint-stained clothes and her old teacher's bag. But now parents and children alike knew that their teacher was teaching the most valuable lesson of all, that true worth comes from how you treat others. One afternoon, as Sarah was leaving her classroom to head to the store, she found Patricia waiting outside. The store manager was holding a small box. We found this in our archives, Patricia said softly. It's the original receipt for your grandmother's ring from 1953. The jeweler's notes say it was sold to a hard-working woman who knows the true value of beautiful things. Sarah opened the box, tears filling her eyes as she read her grandmother's name on the yellowed paper. She looked up at Patricia and saw not the proud, judgmental woman from before, but someone who was finally learning to see beyond the surface. Your grandmother was right, Patricia said quietly. Some things are worth more than their price tag. 6 months had passed since the day Sarah walked into Morton's Jewelry as a humiliated customer and walked out as its owner. The store had changed so much that regular customers sometimes had to check the sign outside to make sure they were in the right place. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead, but now they illuminated a different kind of luxury. Display cases still held expensive jewelry, but beside each piece was a story, tales of craftsmanship, history, and the human spirit behind the sparkle. On this particular morning, Sarah stood in the center of the store, watching a group of high school students getting their first lesson in gemology. Patricia, now wearing a community education director badge, was showing them how to examine diamonds under a microscope. Remember, Patricia said to the students, her voice warm and encouraging, every stone has its own story, just like every person who walks through that door. She caught Sarah's eye and smiled, remembering how much her own story had changed. Ashley, now the head of customer experience, was leading another group through a workshop on business ethics. On the wall behind her hung a framed kindergarten finger painting, a gift from Sarah's students that had become the store's unofficial symbol of transformation. The Jean Foundation for Education and Enterprise had become a model for other businesses in San Francisco. Every month, they offered scholarships to students from underprivileged backgrounds who wanted to study business, design, or gemology. But more importantly, they taught lessons about dignity, respect, and seeing beyond surface appearances. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Michael. Coming to the store's 6-month celebration? Brought your students new art projects to hang up. She smiled, typing back a quick yes. She still drove her Honda to work, still wore clothes with occasional paint stains, and still carried her worn teacher's bag. But now these things were badges of honor rather than marks of shame. The woman who had once clutched her purse away from Sarah was now running their mentorship program, helping other wealthy individuals understand the importance of treating everyone with respect. She had donated her entire designer handbag collection to a charity auction, raising funds for the foundation's scholarship program. As Sarah walked through the store, she overheard a conversation that made her stop. A simply dressed elderly woman was being shown the same sapphire pendant that Sarah had admired 6 months ago. "It might be out of my price range," the woman said hesitantly, "but it reminds me of my daughter's eyes." Sarah touched her grandmother's ring one more time. The simple gold band had started this whole journey, and now it stood as a symbol of something far more valuable than any diamond: the power of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their appearance or status.